before we start off?
To join.
So we'll just give it a couple more minutes. People are still just joining. I think they're coming in from the our first webinar of the day. So we'll give it maybe 2 more minutes and then we shall kick off. So bear with us.
People are still coming in, but whenever you'd like to start.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tanya. Great, thank you. So welcome everybody. Really appreciate everyone joining. I know there's still a few people joining here, but we shall kick off and let them join as we start the chats. So before we start, a couple of housekeeping issues. We will have questions and answers at the end. If this is like other webinars that we have, we tend to get a lot of questions and answers. So please bear with us while we go through them. We'll answer as many as we can. We won't get to them all. But what you can do as a participant is you can actually upvote the question and answers. So when you go into the question and answers icon at the bottom of your screen, have a look at what questions have been asked already and click on the thumbs up and that will upvote it. So we can see that the questions that get the most thumbs up are the most important to you guys. So we'll try to get to those as much as we can. We'll try and prioritize those ones. So without further ado, I am going to kick off. On the call today, you have myself, Michelle Wallace. We've got Adi McGuinness from Sigmar Recruitment, this CEO of Sigmar Recruitment, and we've got Hannah Ormondroyd from CBRE, who's the head of people and data center solutions. So for myself, I'm Michelle Wallace from Host in Ireland, and I'd love to find out who is in the room. Oh, so we've got people have already started voting, so that's great. So I'm going to ask you two questions. How are you feeling about the next 12 months in the data center industry? And also, who's in the room? Who's hiring? Who's looking for a job? Or are you just here for the show? So let's just give you a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds to put in your answers if you haven't answered already. I'm going to end the poll now. Brilliant. Okay, so how are you feeling about the next 12 months in the data center industry? Very positive, planning to grow. That's 51%. Steady as she goes, 41%. We're holding tight, 7%. And rocky paths ahead, 2%. And then who's in the room? So I'm hiring, 17%. I'm looking for a job, 14%. And I'm just here for the show, 69%. Well, hopefully we have a good show for you ahead. So look, today, and it's great that the findings of that poll were actually quite in line with our own research. So we launched a survey at the beginning of August. We surveyed our partners. We have 30 partners here in Host in Ireland. And thank you to all our partners for being partners so that we can bring this kind of content to you. We polled we surveyed our partners, and we also created a kind of hand-picked list of people in the industry in this kind of data center ecosystem. And we asked them about their outlook for the next 12 months in terms of, how they were feeling about it, and also about the jobs that they were planning to create. And what we found was that 96% of the respondents had a positive or very positive outlook for their business. And on top of that, 84% of them are looking to hire in the next 12 months. So cumulatively, it's 1,800 plus jobs that are going to be created in this industry in the next 12 months. And as I said, that's just a sample of the ecosystem. And I think what's really interesting there is that one of the myths around this industry is that, there's these great big data centers and they don't actually hire anybody. So I suppose for me, and a time like this when, a lot of industries are suffering and there's a lot of bleak news out there, it is nice to have a little glimmer of good news amongst it. So I want to dive a little deeper into this with my guests, Hannah Ormondroyd and Aidy McGuinness. We will look at what that means, what kind of jobs are they, what does it mean for the industries, and what's the infrastructure what infrastructure is this supporting as well. At the beginning of August, we launched a new section on our website on www.hostinireland.com/jobs for our 30 partners, just to advertise jobs. Now, bearing in mind, we launched this at the start of August. We thought it would be very quiet starting off, but actually it's been buzzing. There's so much activity on it, loads of jobs going up there, and loads of visits. So there's a lot of activity there, even though it was kind of peak holiday season. So I suppose, taking that, let's just jump right into the intros, and then we can go from there. So Hannah, would you like to give yourself a proper introduction, please, before we kick off?
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone. It's great to be here. As Michelle said, I'm Hannah Ormondroyd. I'm the Global Head of People for the CBRE Data Center Solutions business. So for those of you who may not know us, we provide end-to-end solutions across the life cycle of data centers. So from design, build, and providing services to our clients, and those clients are across all of the market segments in M&E and technology services. I'm also proud to say that I'm the chair of the Infrastructure Masons Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and Infrastructure Masons is it's a global network where we invite all technical professionals to within the digital infrastructure industry to connect, grow, and give back. And really, the focus areas across that space is sustainability, diversity and inclusion and education.
Great stuff. Thanks, Hannah. And Adi.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. Again, thanks again for having us on, and well done on the webinar. Yes, I'm Adi McEnnis. I'm the CEO of Sigmar Recruitment, one of Ireland's leading professional technical recruiters, permanent and increasingly contracting over this while. I'm also the founder of Ireland Gateway to Europe, which is a very equally collaborative to host in Ireland, a collaboration to amplify Ireland's attraction overseas. Most years we'd have 50 or 60 of us traveling to the US, and with the support of the IDA story getting over there. So certainly very interested in the collaborative elements for hosting Ireland. Also co-founder of Talent Summit. So we had some of the international top speakers, TED speakers, people from NASA, from New Zealand Rugby, Just Eat, Netflix, talking about talent in this climate. And a lot of those were in technology as well. And finally, I'm an engineer, so I'm quite interested in the area, and admire the good work you're doing in promoting data centers.
Thank you. Thanks for that. And thanks both of you for coming on today. So look, Hannah, let's start with you. You are, or CBRE is one of the kind of key employers for data center operations in Ireland. So are you surprised at the news today?
No, to be honest, I'm not. I mean, we have a huge number of vacancies. Our business continues to grow. It remains very strong. We've got, always got consistent vacancies, and COVID hasn't really stopped that. So we're in a very fortunate position that we are in a strong industry. But as a business, yeah, we're absolutely continuing to grow, despite obviously some of the challenges that some industries are currently seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of roles are you seeing come available in, within CBRE and even in the ecosystem itself?
I mean, it's across the full spectrum. So, I mean, as you'd expect, a lot of our vacancies are around our critical environment technician roles, and they could be specialising in mechanical, electrical, or IT services or technology services. So you'd expect to have that because that's the largest volume of our roles. But we've also got roles around our contract supports, which is a really interesting role, because that really sits at the heart of our sites and touches every part of the business. It's also a good platform to build your career. So that's a key one for us. But also projects remains really strong, despite, I know there's some challenges around construction in some areas, but we're still seeing positive growth around that area. And of course, all of our functional and specialist functions as well. So it really is generally a full spectrum.
And actually on the construction side, in the press release that we released today, we're actually seeing, according to Mitchell McDermott, one of our partners, there's about a 0 to 5% slowdown in general in construction for this sector. So, it's certainly, I know other sectors have certainly had more dramatic effects on them. So good news there as well. In terms of the jobs and economic multiplier, this is where you come in, Adi, in particular, the North Virginia Tech Council. So I don't know if actually people on this webinar know this, and you guys as well, but we're actually the largest data center cluster in Europe, and Dublin and the greater Dublin area. And the largest outside Europe is in North Virginia, and they've estimated that there's a job and economic multiplier of about 1 to 5 for data centers. So things like, it's not just the people who work in the data centers themselves and all those technicians, but it's the legal, the construction, the refurb, the energy consultants, the security, all of these kind of layers of jobs that sit on top of the data center operations themselves. But then there's also another piece, data centers act as a foundation or as part of the critical infrastructure for a lot of tech and ICT. And so I guess, Adi, this is where you come in, because you've got the ICT layer on top of that. The likes of the big boys like Facebook and Google and Amazon, Microsoft. What are you seeing in terms of recruitment around them? Are they slowing down? Are they speeding up? is it reflective of what we're seeing in this industry?
Yeah, you've asked me a lot there now. Generally, ICT is holding up really well. And the final bit, holding up really well. I mean, obviously, it's been a changing environment for everyone, and maybe more importantly, ICT looks like it's going to hold up very well for the foreseeable as well. And not just the major multinationals. We touched on this earlier, but a lot of SMEs, a lot of Irish SMEs. You probably saw. The VC investment in technology in Ireland in the second quarter was the largest ever, right in the middle of the crisis. I think I was saying earlier as well, a lot of smaller, like not the big, huge multinational East Coast and West Coast US coming over in ICT. And the whole, I mean, there's obviously practical implications of having a data center cluster here, but even the perception of Ireland, to have those, the word literally is overused, literally have strong roots, strong foundations with these organizations. I know we'll go into a bit more detail, but it's definitely a big plus. And I'm sure the IDA, Enterprise Ireland, would concur with that as well, and they're about jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a really good point. In terms of the smaller SME recruiters and, large, world famous, top class leading brands, trying to recruit in the same pool of talent. How can smaller SMEs even compete with some of those bigger brands?
Yeah, again, I think there maybe just people talk about purpose a lot. They get their story across easier. One of the things about not meeting people face to face is storytelling, which is a key part in Ireland and the world, is probably a little bit more challenging, so they're probably in a better position to tell their story, directly from a principal, maybe a little bit move quicker in the process. And in the time of COVID, where companies spent years developing their employee reputation, both in terms of their physical offices, and maybe the word culture is overused, but how they portray their culture and stuff, it's nearly like Control Alt Delete, start again. What's your COVID story? So a lot of smaller companies, I know a lot of them are getting the opportunity to tell their story, maybe look at sectors where COVID has affected detrimentally rather than positively. People talk about this K-shaped recovery, where some industries, I mean, it always happens, but it'd be definitely polarized now. Some industries are thriving and some are definitely struggling. So even getting technology people working in sectors that are struggling, getting them into the sector is a big plus as well. So I think small companies can look at their positives, maybe getting out of the mindset, which was March, April, about survive, get through this to thrive, and look at some opportunities that the market creates, that dispersed work creates. And a lot of that comes down to having the strong basics there. I know one of your working titles in this session was resilience, and we got to speak to people a lot about resilience, and a lot of us doing the basic things well. And part of that basic has got to be having a good data infrastructure in Ireland.
Yeah, great stuff. And actually, that's a really good point that, when we're seeing a lot of job losses across various sectors, and we know that there's opportunities within this sector. I suppose there's a lot of skilled and talented people, perhaps available and maybe looking to make their way into this industry. I know for me, I got into data centers originally in 2007, just as the last crash was hitting. And it's a great industry to be in a downturn, because it remains relatively steady, and particularly given the pandemic, and as people are working from home and remotely more and more. We actually saw on the last webinar, for anybody who was on the webinar before this, we did a poll to say, has anybody interacted with a data center, have used a data center in the last 24 hours? And now 88% of people said yes, but 12% of people either didn't know or said no. And the irony is, we're on Zoom right now. This is going through a data center. If there were no data centers, this webinar would not be happening. So I guess the back to the purpose, the why of data centers, they're so critical at the moment, but it's a great, it is a great industry to get into. There's a lot of positive outcome, or positive sentiment in the industry at the moment. Is there any kind of advice that you guys have, Hannah or Adi, in terms of people maybe, you know, leaving or you know, have been let go, or maybe even just looking for a change? Maybe they're still in employment but trying to get into this industry. Anything you can share with people on how they might get into the industry? How do they get their foot in the door?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I just echo some of the things that you said. It's a great opportunity to help some of these people out, and especially if they're looking for somewhere, an industry that will give them more security. So I guess my piece of advice would be to get connected, and to start finding out more about what we do, how we do it, what we're all about, the types of careers, because there's a huge scope of opportunity, and a real diverse mix of different career paths that people could take. So get connected. Obviously, hosting Ireland is a way to do that. Build your network, and do your research. But I suppose the great news for the 14% of people that are on this call looking for a role is that, you know, certainly from a CBRE point of view, you do not have to have data center experience to certainly join the DCS team. There are a huge amount of transferable skills that we look for, particularly around behaviours. And I would also encourage people to just sort of look at, identify those behaviours such as resilience and communication that are really successful within those critical environments. And they'd stand themselves in really good stead for a career within data centres, especially where people are coming from industries where there are very transferable skills. So other critical environments like aviation or petrochemical, for example.
Great stuff. And Adi, have you anything to add to that?
Yeah, so on a few different levels, absolutely everything Hannah says, and you could do worse than watch Gary's webinar earlier on in the history of data and the importance it's played in Ireland the last 30 years. I mean, I remember the Microsoft days when he's talking about floppy disks and then CD-ROM. I mean, if somebody was talking 30 years ago about, say, the quality of jobs in Ireland that Microsoft and IBM and Digital at the time had, you know, now we'd be judging it and going, these were putting disks and boxes, and then localization, as he said, and then a little bit of call center technical support, and now they're transformed beyond any recognition, but it had to sort of start somewhere. So data centers do have an important strategic part in Ireland, and there is a point there. I know Hannah's going to touch on diversity, but I think one of the facts that has been announced, of the recently unemployed people in the US, a huge proportion are female. So for gender diversity, because a lot of them worked in hospitality and maybe the airline industry. So out of necessity, or out of fulfilling the obligation we've all made towards gender diversity, there will be a huge abundance of talent of people. And I know CBRE, Hannah will give us more details, are more looking at the individual now and how they can train them. But I think there will be migration from one sector to another, maybe like there's never been before. And it probably gives an opportunity. I think in diversity, a lot of companies, there's a lot of talk, a lot of companies understand the philosophy and the morality and the practicality and the rightness of it, but don't know what to do. Now is a great opportunity, not just in data centers, but it happens to be an industry that is quite topical, as you saying, it's very robust and does have an important strategic part in Ireland for purpose in the issue where people should look at it. And if you get companies like, just chatting to Hannah earlier, where they're actively looking to attract people, understanding that there'll be a learning curve and some training involved from not just gender, but maybe age and other elements of diversity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point. I've been, certainly when I started back in the industry, I was very often the only woman in the room for quite a few years at events. And that has definitely changed, but I think there's more to do. Hannah, what are you seeing on that? And what are we doing as an industry to, attract more diversity?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one because we know that we're not as diverse as we would like to be as an industry. But I guess the good news is that there's a much greater awareness now of the criticality of solving the diversity issue. So obviously we want to have diverse businesses because it's it is a better place to work. It's increased productivity, innovation, all of those things. But actually it's essential for our industry because the growth of the industry is far outpacing the number of people that are actually coming in. So we've got to look outside of our industry and look at the different areas of talent particularly that are coming available with industries that are struggling around COVID. But also to Adie's point, with the number of females, you know, that we'd like to bring into the industry as well. Obviously, half the population, it's a massive opportunity. And as a business, we're looking at what ways in which we can attract more diverse employees and show them more faces of the industry. So people like yourself, Michelle, you know, who maybe you were the only female in the room at the start, but being able to show more faces so people can see that there are careers, whether it's ethnic minorities, different age groups, females, for example. So we're looking across how do we attract people in, and that's around obviously our recruitment, but then we also need to make sure we've got inclusive workplaces, so that we can support people, develop people through, and then obviously retain a diverse workforce as well at the same time.
And actually today I saw Facebook announced a really brilliant initiative around returning to work. So they're looking to recruit, I can't remember how many people, quite a lot, but bring them into the business in their data center down in Clonee. People who've been out of work for 2 years or more for any particular reason. And they're doing a 16-week program to try and help give them the skills and the experience to get back into the workforce, and also, you know, have opportunities at the end in Facebook. So I thought that was a really, really good initiative. You know, and it's a nice example, I think, as well for the rest of the industry to kind of take note of. Brilliant initiative. And actually, on that point as well, in terms of diversity and inclusion, and you know how we can attract and make the workplace itself more inclusive. Obviously, with COVID, you know, we've seen that Zoom went from was it 10 million? Oh, now I've got it mixed up. Is it 2 million in December 2019 users to 10 million in, no, I've got that wrong. Anyway, yeah, 10 million, I think, by the end of March. Like, phenomenal growth in just a few months. And, you know, we're seeing a lot of the adoption of digitization has just been, you know, there's 3 years of digitization in 3 months, you know, once COVID-19 hit and people were forced to work from home, find solutions. Businesses had to really just, you know, get everything together and enable people to work from home. And I think that, you know, in itself can improve diversity. You know, what are you guys seeing in terms of for both employers and employees in terms of that kind of distributed workforce? What does it mean? What does it mean for now? I'm gonna ask one of these really complicated questions, so you can decide which you want to answer. But what does it mean for you know, diverse workforce? What does it mean for how people employ? What does it mean for you know, the economy as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity, you know, and I think the companies that are proactively, there's a guy, John Reardon, you likely come across him, who heads up Shopify, who for the last years before this ran, I think it was one of the biggest distributed workforce in Europe, Shopify in Cork with 400, very articulate, very helpful, very collaborative. But he was big into grabbing the opportunity, and not just we tolerate and we allow people to work from home, or we facilitate, design for remote work. And I think that could be huge for diversity. So it's not just, okay, we have a cohort that it suits them, flexible hours, have everything. Maybe that's your intimation, the question, how do we plan for, we're planning for a new future, you know? And even if part of it is remote, or the way they engage with other people, even including in data centers, particularly in data centers, how are we going to plan for this? That gives the opportunity to get out of a rut that we've all been in for years. Again, my view is a lot of companies wanted to change, you know, and wanted to improve this thing, but didn't really know how to do it. Now it's a level playing pitch. Now it's a new start. I mean, the one practical thing, and this might be contentious, personal view, if we're going to talk about diversity, Hannah might have a different view, so we can have an argument, is about quotas. And my colleague, Frank, I was chatting to him, he speaks a lot about diversity, but he would be passionate that rather than having quotas for jobs, we should have quotas for shortlists. And you know, he would say to our clients, make us work hard. If you've got a role that traditionally might have fallen into, say, in gender, a male or female, then ask us for a balanced shortlist, because you can't play God and make the appointment, but at least do the hard work and make sure that we're having we're considering both sides, even if it's more work for those who are doing sourcing for you. And that's my tuppence worth. But I do think that remote working, the new world, presents huge opportunity to get a lot of these things right.
And we'll remain friends, Adi, because that is actually, I totally agree with you. And it's something that we've actually got in place, and it sounds really obvious, but unless you have a diverse shortlist, and you also have, the other critical point is you have to have a diverse interview panel, then you're never going to make a difference. So you've got to have some element of quotas in there. They've got their place, certainly.
That's a good point about
would you think that, Hannah, that a lot of companies, when you're saying that, Michelle's saying about working remotely, to really, really proactively, I mean, have fun with it, you know, say if you're going to design this and you just land it down now and you've got a new business and you can facilitate people working remotely, I don't know, I think there's something there about not just tolerating, okay, you need a, you know, good broadband and you need some more, but look at the whole thing from fresh and look at that as an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's opened certainly businesses' minds to what is possible. So where there may have been some skepticism around you know, large scale working from home, I think this has certainly proved the case. Obviously, it's somewhat tricky around certain parts of a data center, but then what it has done is sort of opens people's minds to, well, what if this can work, then what else can't work? So it's definitely pushing things forward.
And I'd also say, just actually, just as a reminder to anybody who is listening in, if you want to ask your questions now or upvote some of the existing questions there, we will get to look at those now in a minute. But just on that point, you know, when you're looking at distributed workforce and the ability of people to work from home and work remotely, how does that impact, or do you see that impacting on in foreign direct investment? Adi, I know you're heavily, you know, invested or heavily involved in that and in your work and attracting you know, work to Ireland. So do you see that being impacted by this kind of remote working?
Yeah, and it's a big question. And being honest, I'm sure I know some idea on it's a delicate question, because if the whole concept is just going from A to Z and everybody can work remotely, then why use Ireland as a base? You know, we're sort of saying there's talent here, but you still need to work in groups and hubs and have a center or place you can go into. We've produced a lot of data, I think, and also in Ireland, then rebalancing the regional focus as well. So if you have hubs, like we've got a center of excellence in Tralee, and honestly, it is going brilliantly, you know, absolutely brilliantly. Like the scale might scale up to 100. It's not going to go to 2,000, but it works really well. So I think having hubs and having the data, dare I say, to be able to articulate to US companies, I think, again, I'm saying US, it still seems to be 75-80% US companies, that they can have a well-managed, controlled, distributed, data-driven workforce in Ireland, probably with a place to go. You know, I think most of the surveys will say people, even for their own mental health and stuff, nice for, you know, might have to go 2.5 days a week or whatever, or might be there 4 days a week and work 1 day from home. So it's a delicate one. I think I would love to think that Ireland would grab the opportunity and say we are excellent at working from home. Again, we don't just do it because we've had to do it, that here's our proven track record of successful companies who have led the way for dispersed workforce, and here's why they're successful in Ireland.
Great, thanks for that. Hannah, have you anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just think from a remote point of view and more people working from home, what it has enabled us to do is actually increase the types of training and the amount of training that we've been given to people. So obviously a lot of our teams are actually on sites, and there is a physical data center. They're never not going to be, you know, people at that data center. So but because everybody's now working remotely outside of the actual sites, it's kind of forced us to look differently at how we cater for things like training and also engagement. So it's, you know, it's been really amazing to watch actually the levels of engagement and the way in which we've been communicating with teams. And actually I think what we're doing now is probably communicating more directly to individuals than we ever have done, rather than probably historically there was a lot of you know, communication through, you know, cascading through leadership. So I think it's definitely having an impact on our engagement, as well as the amount of training we're able to support with. Although I am looking forward to getting back out to some sites soon.
Yeah, there is a bit of that. It's very nice to you know, get rid of all that commute time and time in traffic and getting from one meeting to the other, but a little human contact is also nice every once in a while. And actually, to your point, AD, I love the you know, the hub idea, and I think it's so important. You know, this office here had had some people in it earlier in the year, and everybody's working remotely, and you know, there is that kind of lack of you know, there's something kind of missing. And actually I'm gonna, because there's some questions around that, so I'm going to move to some of the questions from the audience. So from PJ Rudden, AD, how many people are currently employed in the Irish data centres, and what is the aggregate capacity of these data centres? I don't know if you've got the answer. I might be able to help you on that.
Yeah, no, go on, help me out, Michelle. I'll let you go on.
And Hannah might be able to help as well. But so, you know, we'd love up-to-date figures on this. In a very kind of rudimentary LinkedIn search on data centers and people, you know, you can get 10,000 plus. And certainly what the last report that was done, which I believe is a few years old now, it's about 4 years old, I think, from the IDA, maybe 3 years. There is about 5,000 you know, direct employees, and another 5,000 then indirect full-time equivalents. I would probably argue that there's a lot more, you know, in terms of the investment that we're seeing. So we're seeing on average about 1.3 billion investment in data centers in Ireland on an annual basis at the moment. So, you know, anything that's kind of out of date by kind of 2 or 3 years, I think is quite far behind, you know, what we probably see now. So I guess the answer, my answer is I don't know, but there's a bit of an indication. What are you seeing?
And you had a multiplier effect earlier. I mean, I think obviously the indirect implication with data centers, I don't know if it's answered your question, PJ, a fellow engineer, I believe. But the external factor, or sorry, the indirect factor must be absolutely huge. You know, I mean, having a data center here, as we all know, in itself, it's good. Again, they're probably more regionally based, so they're good. And obviously, the secondary factor from them that they're involving other services. But if you said sixfold, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I also think that we're on it. I think the IDA are humble when they say for each IDA job that their information says another 0.6 of a person has worked. You know, if you look at the impact of a foreign direct investment US company, say in a tertiary town in Ireland, like, it's huge. It's not just that they're using the accountant and the lawyer, but the accountant goes for a cup of coffee, or back in the old days used to go for a pint into a pub, and they would use ancillary services. So I've always felt in a positive way that the knock-on effect of the actual other jobs could be more than one other job per person. So I mean, the multiplier effect is quite impactful.
Yeah, there's also that piece around, you know, 20 years ago, Ireland was, you know, announced as the largest software exporter in the world. And at the time, it was very tangible because everything was shipped out in floppy disks, right? There was shiploads of floppy disks leaving Ireland from Microsoft and the likes. And now that's converted to fiber. So those jobs are still here. Those jobs are, you know, sitting on top of those data centers, if you like, in the ICT world. And, you know, the latest CSO figures is 115,000 jobs in ICT. which, you know, I'm not saying that they're all in data centers, but, you know, there is that it's part of the critical infrastructure that attracts, you know, those type of companies to Ireland as well. So there's another question here. What is the likely mix of permanent versus temporary hires in data center employment here in Ireland?
Well, I think it's one maybe I could touch on, Michelle, kind of like it's been one of the big changes in the last number of months that there is more availability of contractors and temporary people. Obviously, because it's less predictable, the future, companies are leaning towards, and increasingly this would have happened in the world, but increasingly in Ireland, obviously in IT it happens. But now for engineers, there's been a big increase in use of temporary staff and contractors. You know, essentially the same thing. It's just the legal structure around the individual would be slightly different. So that's been a big move, and I think maybe that might have a mentality change where if people get used to contracting, say for engineers and that type of stuff, then it can become a long-term thing. So permanent recruitment has been adversely affected, maybe minus 30-40% across the board in Ireland. I'd say generally contracting has probably increased, and certainly we've experienced that. We've probably doubled our contractors in the last number of months, and we're probably one of the few companies that are still growing in the recruitment space. But contracting temps has been one of the big moves.
I guess we've got a slightly different experience to that, because I guess the nature of our business is that we tend to have long-term contracts with our clients. So the vast majority of our roles are permanent, which is, again, it's, you know, it's great that hopefully we can help some people out, you know, who are suffering from those other industries where they've got the downturn. We occasionally have contractor roles, but currently all our vacancies are permanent, and we continue to sort of see that as well. I'd expect to see that certainly to the end of this year and ongoing into early next year as well.
Great, thank you. The question here from Tommy Fitzpatrick. So Adi and Hannah, do you think it's a lack of awareness or confidence causing a lack of pipelining of talent in the industry?
Oh, hi Tommy. Thanks for the question. I think it's probably both. I think certainly from our perspective, we find it hard to pipeline because we're constantly recruiting, because we've always got new roles due to growth, which is a great challenge to have, but we really want to try and get ahead in terms of our talent pipeline. And that's where we're looking at particular talent segments where we can do that. So around some people within early careers, so ways like apprenticeships, or people that are starting out in their career, particularly where they've been the most affected by unemployment. And I think the Irish statistics also show that. I think it's, if you take into account those young people that might be on is it the pandemic unemployment benefits, it could be over 40% that you could consider unemployed. So that's one thing we're trying to do. We've also doubled our recruitment team in the last month because of the volume of recruitment, which is obviously great news. But I also think there's still a lack of awareness about the industry. So because of the nature of what we do, I suppose we are a bit of a hidden industry, and we're constantly trying to build that awareness. But I guess COVID has actually helped with that, because people have been able to see how we're supporting the economy, and I guess, you know, on a day-to-day basis, like you said earlier, Michelle, the number of platforms that we're now supporting that people are using more and more in their day-to-day lives, and the amount of new Netflix users and all the rest of it. So there's definitely more we can do around awareness, and events like this will continue to help. But we still need to drive, I think, for both areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think probably one of the greatest ambassadors for awareness around data centers, particularly at the beginning of this pandemic, was the Tiger King. How do you onboard? Question from Gary Connolly. How do you onboard or transfer culture or purpose in the current environment for newbies when remote work is the current norm?
Yeah, I don't mind starting with that one, Heidi. It's probably more in my ballpark, I guess. It's really hard. because, you know, I've got people that have joined my team, I haven't even met them yet. So I've interviewed them, I've recruited them, they're now part of my team, and we've still not met. I mean, it's not, I guess, as the fact I'm in a global role, that's not that different, but where you're recruiting for people that normally you would meet face to face, it is quite odd. And we've really tried to put ourselves in the shoes of those people that are joining us, and try to understand what is it that we need to do to really make them feel part of the company. They can kind of feel the culture of the organization, even though they might not be in the office. So we've adapted our onboarding program to try and accommodate that. And there's, you know, lots of things that we've done around different ways we're presenting information, making sure that we're having virtual engagement with people around business topics. But to be honest, one of the most successful ways, and people find the most engaging, is making sure we're having a lot of social activity online. So we've been quite creative in what we're doing, and there's been all sorts going on within the teams, whether it's sort of obviously the quizzes, there's been a lot of fancy dress, been a lot of happy hours after work. So that still has been a really good way to try and connect people in as well.
Very good.
Gary, I was going to say, organize a cocktail party and send people cocktail equipment at home. I know you've already done that. So we would be similar, and saying that we've actually taken a good few people on, and some key hires over the last while who hadn't met people for a couple of months, and communication is key. I think you made that point, Hannah, that again, that guy John Reardon from Shopify would go, rather than looking at us 400 people working remotely, it's actually easier to have one-to-ones, and you're having a one-to-one in somebody's front room, you know, and you're probably getting more like chatting about the person themselves that you might have done when you were, you know, calling people into an office so you didn't have time for the meeting. The whole tolerance of family and all that type of stuff, I think everyone learned in the first 4 or 5 weeks. And, you know, I loved all that, having art competitions for the kids and, you know, embracing it. I mean, practically, not being airy fairy, really practically embracing the fact that people are working from home. So I think we've all learned a huge amount, and I think that mix of work, but a huge amount of social, and actually being disciplined to be social, like 11 o'clock coffee mornings, whatever after work things, about having quizzes or poker or drinks and all that type of stuff. And not everything is for everyone, but it's nice to have it there available.
Great, thank you. So we've a couple more questions, and I know we're kind of getting, I say a couple more, we have a few more questions. So I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Stephen Doyle, are there any good examples of companies subsidising their people to go permanent remote working? The government have a tax-free $320 per day scheme, but it is very hard for an employer to administer. So
we've seen it quite a bit, Michelle. So some company, I mean, SMEs are probably a bit more agile in what they can do, you know, and some had it as a reward, or some had it as an incentive just for people to work from home. But even some of the small stuff like the office equipment, you know, again, out of necessity, where everybody did this in 3 days, what we planned for over years. And you had a desk that was home, and you had a seat, and you had a PC, a laptop probably. And in fact, most of the broadband worked. There were obviously outages, but most of it worked. But I know some of the smart companies really want to create an excellent environment at home, something that really, again, is this designed for remote work, that if you're saying, I wanted a really nice place where I'm going to be comfortable to sit for 7-8 hours a day and get the work done. So a lot of it is about that. I mean, people talk about trust a lot, probably some trust with some measurements, and maybe changing the incentives, whatever we're measuring with people at the start of the week or the start of the day or the start of the month, just have a rethink of that and see, can we do it better remotely?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to Jordan Langton's question. Due to the very high volume of data center construction projects in Ireland and abroad, having technical professionals on all of these projects with previous data center experience is impossible. With this in mind, what other sectors do you feel are the most transferable in terms of working experience?
I mean, as I said earlier, it's a really good question. We generally recruit for behaviours, and the behaviours that we know will be successful within a critical environment. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that it's an industry that's within that critical environment already, as if those behaviours, someone can display those behaviours. But if we are looking at particular industries, and we've actually just finished some quite detailed research of the industries that do have a wealth of availability of staff because they have seen a downturn. So it'd be industries such as aviation, pharma, petrochemical, and any of those sort of critical environment spaces where people would be used to kind of operating in the way that we might within a data center. So you don't need to necessarily have data center experience.
Yeah, and talk about job and economic multiplier. You know, there's also those other layers around the energy provision for the industry as well. And I know there's a lot of investment at the moment around the renewable energy sector, which, you know, will also create a lot of jobs around there as well. So, okay, so Adi, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I would agree that I mean, the data center industry is relatively new and changing a lot. You know, I remember years ago somebody said when JavaScript came out and somebody had an ad in said 3 years experience in JavaScript, and the guy rang me and he said it's only around for a year. You know, so like data centers have changed a lot and will continue to change. I mean, to Gary and George's point earlier at the other webinar, it's changing so quickly that any company probably that says I need 10 years experience for a senior role in data centers, it's probably not looking for the right skills. You probably need people who are adaptable. And I'm not naive. I'm an engineer, and I know you need certain sort of core skills. But I loved Hannah's thing about retraining and just looking at their capabilities and see can they get them into. So obviously a bit more regulated industries, probably like pharma, aviation, selling, makes sense. But I wouldn't put anything out. You know, it depends on the role.
And actually on that, you know, Hannah, you said about behaviors, you know, when you're looking out for certain behaviors, how do you get that across on a CV for somebody who's trying to get noticed in this industry and maybe is coming in from a, you know, completely different industry? How do they, you know, how do they communicate that on a bit of, on a 2-pager?
Well, that's where it's really hard, and that's where we have increased the size of our recruitment team so that we can basically get out there. Nothing beats a conversation. So we would really encourage people to reach out to us. You know, whether that's to me directly or any of my team. We're on LinkedIn as well. You'll find us under CBRE DCS. Just reach out, connect, and have a conversation, because it's really difficult to get that across, like you say, on a piece of paper. I mean, there are some buzzwords that would be, you know, good to use, like, you know, being able to work within an environment that you have to be very resilient, good communicator, those types of things. So people can do their sort of research of what might be those critical behaviours to have, and make sure they've got some of those words within their CV. But I do think anything beats a conversation.
Great, thank you. I have a quick question here from Bernadette Fernandez. I think she's looking for a job here in Ireland. Are governments looking for population growth? And if so, would they consider attracting talent from other countries like Canada?
Yeah, I think the obviously EU is wide open, but I think the visa process has improved a lot and continues to. And I would imagine there is a skill-based, obviously, criteria, which is EU legislation. But I'd imagine because, say, in data centers, we're looking for so many staff, that I would imagine satisfying a reasonable level of skill base would mean that Ireland is very much open to non-EU applicants. And again, to your point about how would I present myself, I mean, it's people in data centers love to talk. You know, it's not that difficult to find out what skills they're looking for. So if you can tell a story where you completed something, work or non-work, that satisfies the type of skills about discipline, resilience, hard work, compliance, and don't wait to be asked. Tell that story. Tell a story in your CV. Tell a story on LinkedIn. Share it, and obviously be prepared to tell it at interview.
Great stuff. Thank you. Well, look, I think we're at the top of the webinar now. I've really enjoyed this conversation, really appreciate your input, Hannah and Adi. It's been fantastic. Just a reminder to everybody that's on the webinar, we do have the hostireland.com /jobs page. So if you want to go on there and have a look, and you know, there are jobs there from our partners. We're going to be building that you know, over the coming months. We'd love your input on it. You know, we'd love to find out what you want from the page, what you don't want from the page. But you know, we're certainly excited to be hopefully highlighting some of those 1,800 plus jobs that are going to be available in the industry over the next 12 months. So again, thank you so much, Adi. Thank you, Hannah, and good evening. Thanks to everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.